You're not a mother, you're a liability, and you're one signature away from disappearing for good. Those were the words that shattered her, spoken with a smile by the man who'd already taken everything from her. But Marla didn't disappear. Instead, she dug up a secret worth $300 million, exposed a buried conspiracy, and rewrote the ending they thought she didn't deserve. And it all began with a locked door, a basement, and a key that didn't fit. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The hallway outside courtroom 4B reeked of burnt coffee and threadbare carpet. Marla waited under the flickering fluorescent tube fingers locked around a manila folder, already stripped of meaning. Creases pulled at her blouse, damp patches spreading under her arms, yet she made no move to smooth them. Her lawyer muttered a strand of reassurance words that dissolved into the static lodged in her chest. Bo strode out with the same boardroom polish as ever. His attorney, young, sleek, expensive, trailed behind Thumb, busy on a phone, as though the verdict were nothing more than a confirmed appointment. The paper in Marla's grip blurred. Temporary custody, 6 weeks. After that, Ezra would pass fully into Bo's care, subject to financial review and residential stability. Tears hadn't broken in the courtroom, not even when Bo tossed her that smug half-smile. In the restroom lobby, though, she sagged against a stall door until her knees folded the tile, pressing cold against her forehead, like a hand ordering her to stop pretending. That evening, the apartment still carried its stale undertone of mold, no matter how many candles she burned. Ezra curled against her on the couch, comic balanced over his knees. He didn't mention the hearing, didn't ask why Dad won. Instead, he offered her a popsicle and bargained for 15 extra minutes awake. She gave a nod without lifting her eyes. When he finally drifted off, Marla sat before her laptop. The screen glowed back as she typed, erased, typed again. Half her inbox was stacked with auto-replies, position filled. The rest was mute. A new subject line blinked into view. Estate of Henry Blackwood. Next of kin. Notification. She clicked. The message was clipped, tangled in legal phrasing. Mr. Blackwood, deceased 3 weeks earlier, had left a house in Asheville, North Carolina. No spouse, no children, and apparently no closer kin than her niece by marriage on his late wife's side. A scanned letter appeared, blocky handwriting stamped across the page. If this reaches you, it means I'm out of time. But maybe you're not. Don't let them decide for you. The house is yours now. Do something with it. Her eyes locked on the message, then traced the name again and again. Blackwood. She hadn't thought about him since childhood, maybe once when Ezra asked about family. Rising slowly, Marla crossed into the small bedroom and paused by her son's bed. His arm draped over the mattress-edge fingers, clutching the blanket as if gripping something unseen and essential. A minute later, she opened the closet and pulled out the one suitcase with working wheels. The zipper rasped as she checked the inside pocket, the sound sharp in the quiet apartment. The suitcase thudded into the trunk, her hands trembling on the handle before she slammed it shut. Hours later, tires hummed against the narrowing road fences, leaning in as maple leaves skittered across the windshield. Ezra pressed his forehead to the glass, silent, except for the faint click of his tongue. They passed a general store with one flickering sign, a gas station with pumps wrapped in yellow tape, and finally turned down a gravel lane flanked by black-eyed Susans and weeds tall as a child. The mailbox at the end was tilted, rust bleeding through white paint. On its side, faded letters spelled HB, like initials on a headstone. This is it, she muttered, not quite to him, not quite to herself. The house stood crooked at the edge of a sloped yard. Shutters hung loose. Ivy climbed up one side like a secret trying to hide something worse. A foreclosure notice flapped lazily on the porch beam, nailed down with more authority than care. Ezra climbed out first, rubbing his arms. It smells like old rain, he said. Marla stepped onto the porch, her boots sticking slightly where sap had dried and cracked. She tried the door. It didn't budge. She shoved harder, shoulder against wood, until it creaked open like it hadn't in years. The air inside was stale, damp cloth-dried glue and the sharp tinge of metal. Light filtered through curtains, yellowed by time. Dust hung thick, unmoving, like the house had been holding its breath. Marla entered slowly. The floor groaned beneath her step. Framed pictures along the hallway showed smiling faces. She didn't recognize people frozen in better decades. One frame still had a price tag on the glass. Another had been turned to face the wall. Ezra vanished into one of the back rooms. "I'm claiming this one," he shouted. She didn't answer. Her eyes had fixed on a table near the kitchen door. A town map was spread across its corners curling upward. Red circles dotted several spots, some along the river, one in the industrial district, and another over a place labeled Sterling Development, Restricted Access. Pinned beside the map was a weathered envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. Her name. Inside a folded note read, "If this finds you, I'm already gone. Don't take anything at face value. Don't trust the paperwork. What matters is buried." Beneath that, in a different ink, just one line flipped the ground over. She was still staring at it when someone knocked on the screen door. The sound made her jolt. A man stood outside, weathered, tall, lean. His shirt was tucked neatly into faded jeans. A wide scar stretched from below his ear to the edge of his collarbone, catching the late sunlight. "Marla Blackwood?" he asked. His voice was calm, gravelly. "Yes, Tobin Rourke. I live 2 lots down. I worked with Henry a long time ago." He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped in with the caution of someone used to navigating damage. She let him pass. The way his eyes skimmed the ceiling beams suggested he'd walked these rooms before. "He always said this place would outlive him," Tobin murmured. Guess he was right. Her gaze followed as his fingers skimmed the kitchen table's worn edge. "Did you know him well? Worked on some underground plumbing systems together back in the day?" Before he got into trouble with the Sterlings. A knot pulled tight in her chest. The company Tobin nodded. "Biggest name around here, and the quietest threat. Henry told me once he had proof they were buying out officials to rig zoning laws. Then he stopped talking. Then he stopped showing up." Ezra reappeared holding something small in his palm. This was in the vent behind the dresser. It was a key. Brass. Heavier than it looked. Ornate teeth notched strangely. No label. Tobin examined it under the dim light. "That doesn't match anything in this house." Her thumb dragged slowly along the ridges. The metal was cool, almost oily. Not decorative. Purposeful. Her eyes darted back to the letter flipped the ground over. Not metaphorical. Maybe not even symbolic. Literal. Ezra yawned, stretching dramatically. "Can we stay here tonight?" Her body stalled, caught between retreat and surrender. The walls moaned under each draft, carrying the stench of mildew and forgotten years. But the thought of turning around, going back to Chicago, with nothing, no case, no job, no future, hollowed her out. "We'll make it work," she said more softly than she expected. They scavenged what they could clean, blankets from a trunk in the hallway, bottled water that hadn't yet expired, and 2 working flashlights. That night, once Ezra had sunk into sleep on the couch, wrapped like a burrito in mismatched quilts, Marla sat alone in the kitchen with the key in her hand. A harsh scrape fractured the stillness metal, grating on metal drawn out and deliberate rising from behind the lower cabinets. She froze, breath shallow as the hinge groaned once, and then stilled, leaving the kitchen heavy with waiting. She lay awake for hours, every muscle tense, the brass key slick with sweat in her palm. When Ezra finally shifted into steady breathing beside her, she slipped upright onto the mattress-edge flashlight, trembling slightly in her grip. The pantry door loomed across the dark, its silence sharper than the noise that had broken it. By morning, the silence in the house felt heavier. Dust clung thicker. Ezra had already moved on to sketching on napkins using a dried-out marker he'd found under the couch. Marla scanned the kitchen walls. Something gnawed at her. Henry hadn't left riddles just to sound mysterious. She started with the pantry. Nothing. The cabinet beneath the sink pipes and a broken mousetrap. But near the back corner behind the breaker box, the wall looked patched. Not poorly, but newer than everything around it. The drywall was smoother, whiter, and faint pencil markings showed where it had been measured and cut. She tapped along its edge. Hollow. Dragging a screwdriver from a drawer full of dull utensils, she chipped at the paint seam until the drywall groaned and cracked. Behind it was darkness, an unlit shaft, dropping vertically like a well. A single metal rung stuck out at chest level, rusted but steady. Just as she leaned closer, the floor vibrated slightly with footsteps. A voice called from behind her. "You don't want to go poking in places Henry didn't open for you?" She turned. A uniformed man stood just outside the kitchen arch, hands at his belt, not near his weapon, but close enough to signal intent. His badge read, Sheriff Blake Kendricks. You got a warrant? Marla asked, squaring her shoulders. Don't need one. House is flagged under property review. Technically, until probate's finalized, you're just visiting. She didn't move from the hole. He let his eyes wander first to the opening, then the map still spread across the table, then to Ezra's sketchbook on the floor. A lot of folks come into old homes thinking treasure's buried under floorboards. You start knocking holes in walls, someone's going to think you're up to more than grieving. Marla let the silence stretch. He adjusted his belt again. You should seal that back up. And if I were you, I'd let the lawyers handle whatever's in this place. Blackwoods don't tend to come out ahead when they stir trouble. His car lingered at the curb engine, purring for 2 long minutes before it eased away. She lingered in the doorway, listening until the last vibration of tires dissolved into distance. By afternoon, Tobin appeared again, toolbox dangling from one hand. He pointed to a corner of the roof where rainwater had begun dripping into the attic and asked for a ladder. They worked shoulder to shoulder, wordless, until she broke it with a question. What happened to Henry? Tobin wiped his hands on a rag. He believed too much in justice, he said. Didn't know when to stop asking questions? He had evidence. Tobin nodded slowly. He found irregularities in land acquisitions. Funds moved through fake nonprofits. He called a reporter once. 2 weeks later, the station shut down its investigative unit. Next month, he stopped getting calls. After that, he stopped opening the blinds. Her fingers cinched tighter around the flashlight. Sterling has that much reach. Tobin's gaze held hers without reply. That evening, Marla cataloged everything: photos of the map, Henry's note, the strange key. Then she began recording voice memos on her phone describing each item aloud, in case someone needed to piece it together without her. When she unfolded the will again, her eyes caught something she hadn't noticed the first time. The words "flip the ground over" were printed over a faint design. When she tilted the page toward the lamplight, the paper's backside revealed a blurred architectural diagram, basement schematics maybe, but the image shimmered slightly as if affected by light exposure. A faint radiation symbol hovered near the center, almost invisible. The image refused to scan. Photocopiers rejected it too. She had tried both. Lines shimmered back at her, then her attention snapped toward the pantry opening. A single thud fractured the stillness outside, followed by a pause sharp enough to lift the hairs on her arms. Ezra stirred faintly on the mattress as the doorbell shrilled, 2 clipped chimes slicing through the house like a blade. She unlatched the door and swung it open onto an empty porch. No footsteps, no idling car, only fog creeping from the fields, pale and restless. Her eyes swept the gravel path, then the hedges, then the tree line. Nothing. Almost retreating inside, she finally noticed an envelope at her feet, plain, unstamped, its flap pressed tight. Fingers trembling, she tore it open. Inside lay a photograph Ezra captured yesterday, standing near the hardware store, popsicle in hand, squinting against the sun. Beside the image, ink scrawled raggedly across the margin bled into the paper. Know your place. Her breath hitched. She pressed the photo flat against the counter, trying to steady her hands. Ezra padded into the room, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Is something wrong? She blocked the photo with a cereal box and smiled too quickly. Eat first, she said. We've got errands. Later at the sheriff's office, the deputy behind the desk glanced at the envelope, raised one eyebrow, and muttered, "Not a threat. Just weird." He logged it without urgency, already halfway back into his sandwich as she walked out. Back at the house, her phone rang. She almost let it go to voicemail. No number showed, but something pulled her thumb to the green button. A beat of silence. Then Beau's voice. "You're making a mess you won't be able to clean." She stepped outside onto the porch, watching the wind ripple the weeds. "You've got no business poking around Henry's leftovers," he continued. "Whatever you think you're owed, it's not yours. How do you know what I'm doing?" Another pause. "I always know." The call cut. Inside, Ezra had disappeared from the kitchen. She found him crouched behind the couch, knees to his chest, staring out the window. Someone was watching. By the trees. She pulled him into her arms, his skin clammy. He didn't cry, just clung to her shirt, jaw clenched tight. That night, sleep didn't come. Marla sat near the hallway with a flashlight and the key in her lap, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Outside, the wind moaned low, and branches scraped the siding like fingers dragging along bone. By morning, Tobin arrived with fresh wood for patching the attic. She hesitated before telling him about the photo. He rubbed his scar, mouth twitching, with something between regret and warning. There's a reason Henry never opened that hatch, he said. We built the basement to hide records. Financial ones, real ones. Sterling cooked their public books. The hatches were sealed when the investigation got too close. So you knew I buried the foundation, he said. Didn't realize what was in it until years later. By then I'd already been paid to forget. She looked down at her hands. Dirt still rimmed her nails from the wall she'd broken yesterday. You think they'd hurt Ezra? I think they'd do worse than that if they thought you'd talk. Before she could ask more, 2 patrol cars pulled into the yard. Dust curled around the tires. The same deputy from the station stepped out, followed by a younger officer with a clipboard. Official notice, he said, reading without looking up. Probate review flagged this residence. Until legal confirmation, you're not permitted to make structural changes or occupy beyond 30 days. Marla took the paper. Her grip tightened as she scanned it. Is this a scare tactic, she asked. We don't write the rules, the deputy muttered. We just serve the notice. They left a printed copy taped to the door. She ripped it down an hour later, but the tape left a clean square on the chipped paint, like a wound that refused to clot. By afternoon, the sky had shifted, the kind of quiet that always came before storms. She stood in the backyard, phone pressed to her ear, Ezra tossing a tennis ball against the garage siding a few feet away. I need the deed documents filed last week, she said into the receiver. Under the Blackwood estate, yes, I have the reference number. Static fuzzed through the line. She turned slightly toward the house for better signal. When she looked back, the ball was rolling in a slow arc across the grass alone. It reached her foot and stopped. Marla dropped the phone, eyes sweeping the yard in a frantic rush. Ezra wasn't by the bushes, not near the shed, not anywhere along the siding. Her chest tightened as she sprinted toward the garage, heart pounding against her ribs. Ezra rustled behind the shed. She spun. He crouched low between 2 cracked planters, knees smeared with mud, face drained of color, arms wrapped so tightly around himself it looked like he was trying to keep from breaking apart. She knelt, brushing a leaf from his cheek. Sweetheart, why did you... I saw someone. His voice barely registered. They were by the woods, just standing there. She scooped him up, carried him inside, locked both doors, and pulled every curtain shut. Later, when his breathing slowed and his grip loosened, she returned to the pantry. She opened the hatch and descended, flashlight in her mouth, Ezra's key tied to a string around her neck. The air below was thick, damp, sour. Cement walls loomed close. Pipes twisted overhead, like tangled veins. Her light skimmed the floor, muddy shoe prints not hers. At the far end, a steel chest sat beneath a rotted tarp. Chains crossed the lid. One rusted lock. She tugged the brass key from her neck. It slipped in. Inside, nestled among yellowed papers, sat an old cassette tape. On the label, backwards is the only way forward. That night, Tobin arrived with a handheld recorder. Had to patch this up with parts from 3 different radios, he said, fiddling with the dials. Might chew the tape, but it'll play. The tape clicked. Static. Then a breath. Henry's voice crackled through, hoarse, steady. If you're hearing this, it means I'm out of reach. Probably in the ground or somewhere worse. Marla sat, frozen knees tucked under her hands, balled into the blanket. I was pressured into signing over my shares. Beau's father threatened my wife, our son, said accidents happen in small towns and no one ever looks too hard. I refused at first, but they came back with copies of emails I'd never written. Signatures I didn't recognize but couldn't disprove. They doctored it all. I signed. Not for the money, but because fear is a quiet killer. I thought I'd protect them. But that wasn't enough. The tape hissed. Then they used Sterling Construction as a cover. Laundering funds through ghost projects, infrastructure repairs. That never happened. I kept copies. I buried them. If you found this, find the map. Dig deep. It cut out. Marla exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding it since the first word. She backed up the audio file to her cloud drive, drafted an email to a law firm she'd once temped for attaching the voice recording, saving it, but not hitting send. Just in case, she whispered, eyes flicking toward Ezra's door. By morning, the sky had turned brittle blue. She took the back road to town, trying to push away the thought of how close they'd come yesterday. The farmer's market sat lazily at the edge of the square, folding tables, sun-faded tarps, bushels of peaches. On her way back, a black SUV pulled across the road, blocking both lanes. A man stepped out, bald-sharp suit, no smile. He didn't speak, just handed her an envelope through the cracked window. Inside, another photo of Ezra. He was on the swing in their yard, the timestamp last night after dark. Beneath the image, "Don't send anything. Last warning." The man turned and walked back to the car, vanishing down the hill. Instead of heading straight home, she swung into the gas station on Route 9, shut the door behind her, and smashed her phone against the curb until the screen fractured shards, scattering into the gutter. A burner replaced it. Every password drive email, even Ezra's school login, was reset. The photograph tore cleanly in half, then curled into ash behind the station matches, reeking of turpentine. Black smudges streaked her fingers. When she wiped them on her jeans, the residue clung stubbornly, no different from the dirt she would claw at hours later. By dawn, soil packed beneath her nails. Knees soaked through, she kept prying at the slab until the final edge shifted. Ezra perched a few feet away, on a folding chair, granola bar in hand, studying her with quiet curiosity and a flicker of unease. He didn't speak aloud. Her knuckles scraped cold concrete, then metal. Brushing aside the mud revealed a rectangular lid set flush with the earth, a keyless combination lock in its center, 4 dials waiting at 0. Etched faintly above the numbers, 1979 blurred with age. She turned the wheel slowly. Nothing gave. She didn't force it, only hovered lips, parted lungs stalled. Inside the house, a calendar alert buzzed across her phone. One word glowed: check. Attached a file, no sender, the subject line insurance. A single locked archive. Instead of opening it, she scanned the living room. Stillness pressed close. Ezra had retreated to his room, the door left open, just a cracked television, murmuring an overplayed cartoon. Her laptop flickered to life. Double click. The archive asked enter password. She froze, then remembered Tobin's last email. "If I don't come back, the password is the day Henry signed his silence." 1979. Her fingers typed it in. The file unlocked. Her screen filled with folder after folder labeled scans, spreadsheets, voice memos, email transcripts. Each file name struck like a match in the dark. Shellco transfers, Crowley wire record, Sterling internal ledger. Full. She opened one, then another. Her eyes narrowed as rows of numbers bled together, account details, payment instructions, false vendor names. One entry showed a 6-figure transfer to a nonprofit that didn't exist. Another listed a payout to a judge for custodial case support. She clicked deeper. There, bold and unmistakable, recipient Halden P. Crowley, amount $175,000, note to custodial discretion, settlement date 3 weeks before her custody hearing. The screen blurred for a moment. Her lungs forgot how to move. The judge who called her emotionally unstable in court. The one who ignored the testimonies. He had been paid, bought quietly, efficiently by the same network that now threatened her family. A hollow bang outside made her jolt. She slammed the laptop shut and peered through the curtain. Just a loose shutter clapping against the side of the house. She backed away from the window and texted Tobin. The message didn't deliver. She tried calling, straight to voicemail. When she checked the timestamp on his last email, her pulse quickened. It had arrived nearly 4 hours ago, long before she'd noticed he was missing. She grabbed her keys and drove down to his house. The front door hung open an inch. Inside, drawers were yanked out the coffee table, flipped photos smashed across the floor. His old radio was gone. So was his coat. His wallet sat untouched on the counter. She called his name. No answer, no sound at all. She drove back in silence, knuckles white on the wheel. That night, she triple-locked every door, shoved a dresser against the back one, and kept Ezra's mattress beside hers on the living room floor. He didn't ask questions. He sensed the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept checking the time without knowing why. When Ezra finally drifted into sleep, Marla copied the encrypted files to 3 flash drives. One she wrapped in foil and taped inside a ceiling vent. Another she buried beneath the soil where the stone slab had rested. The third she slipped into her jacket pocket. At the kitchen table, she drafted an email to a reporter she'd once met during her brief stint at a law office. "This may not reach you, but if it does, what I'm sending could explain a lot. Names, dates, payments. I have backups. I'm not running. I just want to be heard." Her fingertip hovered over send, then withdrew. Instead, she replayed Henry's recording, his voice rough through the static. He spoke of boardroom coercion, erased names, threats carried by letters, and shadowed phone calls. One phrase returned again and again. Backward is the only way forward. She leaned back, eyelids pressed shut. The ache in her chest wasn't fear anymore, but the weight of knowing justice would never come from courts or badges. Rescue wasn't coming. If anything changed, she would have to ignite it herself. Her hand inched toward the burner phone when a knock rattled the door, slow, deliberate, splitting the quiet like a blade. No second knock followed. Marla froze, lungs seized, gaze fixed on the door. Ezra murmured in his sleep, rolling against the blanket. She counted 30 heartbeats before rising barefoot, every floorboard groaning under her step. At the peephole emptiness. Not a shadow, not even a silhouette, only the dim wash of the porch light. Back in the kitchen, the laptop glared from the table. Rows of transactions sprawled across the screen, routing numbers, consulting payments, sustainability projects. Familiar names surfaced: school officials, town clerks, even a dentist's wife who once pressed a business card into her palm. Her pace on the trackpad quickened. Breath came jagged. This wasn't corruption at the edges, it was an entire ecosystem, every role either purchased, silenced, or erased. Her hands shook. She copied the folder again, then tapped her burner screen. It blinked no service. She tried once more, still nothing. Racing to the back room, she found the router cable sliced clean, the edge still faintly warm. Ezra. She bolted into the living room. The blanket lay crumpled where he'd been. The back door nudged open, dresser dragged aside with precision. Her knees buckled for a second, hands pressed against the doorframe. On the kitchen table sat something she hadn't seen before, a small handheld recorder. She hesitated, then pressed play. A woman's voice, raspy but clear, filled the room. "If you're hearing this, it means the bloodline has cracked." The voice was unmistakably Southern, aged with wear. She sounded calm, worn, not frightened. "I'm Margaret Blackwood. If anyone ever tells you I died in a hospital, they're lying. They kept me quiet after Henry refused. After he said no. I knew they would come for him, just like they came for me. They made it look like I wandered off into the woods one night, but I never left. I just stopped being visible." Marla's mouth dried. The recorder clicked softly, continuing. "I left this message for my son, but if you're not him, and you're still listening, then the fire hasn't gone out in our name. Don't be afraid. Truth has a longer shelf life than any empire." The tape clicked off. Marla slumped to the floor, back pressed against the cabinet. For the first time, she didn't feel defiant. She felt hollow. Her throat ached. Her hands were numb. She almost reached for the phone again. Almost dialed Bo Sterling. To beg, plead. Just take the files, leave Ezra alone. She wouldn't talk, wouldn't publish, wouldn't fight. But the burner was dead. No signal. Not even a battery icon. She reached for the recorder again. Flipped the switch. New file. She stared at the blinking red light. "My name is Marla Redmond," she said softly. "If you find this, it means I didn't get out. Or maybe I got out too late." She inhaled shakily, voice catching. "My son's name is Ezra. He's 8. He likes peanut butter more than jelly, and he's afraid of swimming pools but not the ocean. I didn't mean for him to get caught up in this. I didn't mean," her voice cracked. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, then continued. "They've bought this town. They've bought the silence of every voice that could have helped. I don't know who I can trust. If this gets to anyone who's still clean, look in the Sterling infrastructure files. Look for the Crowley payments. There's a ledger in the drive titled Backdoor Final. That's the one." She hit stop. The lights cut out all at once. A low hum filled the air, distant but growing louder. Then headlights spilled through the kitchen window, harsh and flickering. She crawled to the edge of the living room and peeked through the curtain. An old box truck, its paint-chipped bumper, half detached, rattled to a stop in front of the house. Its engine chugged, then stuttered into silence. The back doors creaked open. A tall man jumped down, then another figure climbed out, smaller hair-matted hands bound at the front. Ezra. He was barefoot, a sock hanging from one ankle, dirt smudged along his cheek. But he was moving. Alive. She rose from the floor without a sound, heart pounding, like it might crack her ribs. Her eyes locked onto her son's frame as one of the men shoved him forward toward the porch, just as another pair of boots landed heavy on the wooden steps. The porch groaned under the woman's weight. She moved fast, cutting the zip ties from Ezra's wrists, murmuring to him in a voice just above a whisper. Marla didn't lower the poker until Ezra rushed into her arms, bearing his face against her side, trembling but unhurt. The woman stepped into the hallway's glow, removing her hood. The lines of her face were deeper now, skin-weathered eyes sharp. "I'm Nadine," she said quietly. "Tobin's wife, or used to be." Marla blinked. "But they said you died," Nadine finished, almost amused. "Car fire, that's what they made it look like." "I'm not the first they erased." Ezra clung to Marla as she pulled him, close eyes darting between them. Nadine scanned the house quickly, then shut the door behind her. "I've been waiting for a long time to come back, but Tobin said it wasn't safe until now. Told me to bring you this." From her coat, she produced a flat envelope, sealed heavy thick with paper. She handed it over carefully, like it was more dangerous than useful. Marla opened it slowly. Inside was a dossier, old school, no USBs or scanned QR codes. Hard ink on heavier stock. She flipped through. A certified copy of her custody court transcript. A financial declaration by Bo Sterling's legal team. A sealed statement from Judge Halden P. Crowley, dated 3 months before the trial, requesting private grant funding for educational outreach, signed by one of Sterling Infrastructure's shell foundations. At the bottom, a signed approval letter by Bo himself. Marla stared. The judge who had claimed her home was unstable. Who said she didn't provide sufficient evidence of financial security? Who told her that Ezra deserved routine? He'd been bought. Bought outright with a check labeled as education support. A handwritten note clipped to the last page read, "Cross-reference this with ledger line 19. It's the same account." Her breath left her in fragments. "Why are you doing this now?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Because Tobin's missing," Nadine replied. "And if I don't do something, it means they won." Marla didn't speak for a long moment. She scanned the pages again. There was a clarity in the evidence, legal structured, undeniable. Not just implications, proof. Admissible, traceable, time-stamped. She printed 3 sets of the documents using Tobin's old printer in the garage. Then she logged into an anonymous mail drop used by a support group she'd joined for single mothers, one that shared legal advice and state-by-state custody strategies. Through 3 women in 3 different cities, she routed the documents to 3 independent news outlets, all out of state. Small, local, hungry. They wouldn't sit on it. Ezra drifted asleep in the crook of her arm while she typed the appeal, a formal motion, asking for reevaluation of the custody judgment anchored on evidence of judicial misconduct. The request went to a judge in the next county, not Crowley, and not yet compromised by Sterling money. Her finger hovered above the button. If the motion failed, Bo would strike in daylight Ezra, taken from her by the clean blade of the law. Quiet. Absolute. But if it succeeded, the custody battle would collapse, and with it the scaffolding of everything Sterling had built. She pressed send. Then the waiting began. Morning brought no answer. She fed Ezra toast, past Tobin's abandoned house, scrubbed the hallway rug, where mud had hardened, folded towels with restless hands. Nadine was gone by then, leaving only a note, "I'll keep moving. If they see me, it ruins your shot." By early evening, Marla was standing at the sink when her inbox pinged. The subject line notice to appear. Reevaluation hearing scheduled. She clicked it with shaking fingers. Your hearing has been scheduled for Asheville Regional Court, Room B2, within 72 hours of this notice. Failure to appear may result in default judgment. Her knees weakened as she read it again. The clock had started. The courthouse in Madison County didn't look like a place where battles were won. Beige brick and aging flagpole with frayed stripes, and a vending machine in the lobby that still sold tab. But the moment Marla stepped through the metal detector, with Ezra's hand in hers, the weight in her chest shifted. Not gone, but looser, like a knot starting to come undone. Inside courtroom 3A, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Rows of wooden benches were mostly empty, just a few locals with bored eyes, and a clerk flipping through files with pink highlighter smudged across her knuckles. Bo sat at the far table, crisp in a gray suit, eyes blank but jaw locked. Beside him, a woman Marla didn't recognize, a sharp-featured attorney with a folder already open, her nails tapping steadily against the wood. Marla didn't look at Bo. She focused on the judge, mid-50s, silver buzz-cut glasses, perched low on his nose. Judge Lorne Kessler. No sterling money in his filings, no donations, no connections, no flags, at least not yet. All parties ready, he asked. Beau's attorney stood. Yes, Your Honor. We intend to demonstrate that Ms. Redmond has unlawfully seized property, endangered a minor, and falsified court documents to challenge a settled custody ruling. Marla didn't flinch. She reached into her case file. I'd like to submit into evidence a certified ledger of Sterling Infrastructure's illicit payments, including one to Judge Crowley 3 months prior to my hearing. The judge glanced over his glasses. Do you have a copy? She handed him the document along with the notarized chain of custody. The opposing attorney moved to object, but Judge Kessler lifted a hand. Let me read. The courtroom settled into a hush, broken only by the judge's page turns. He frowned slightly at line 19, then flipped back to the top, double-checking the dates and account routing codes. And this, Marla continued, is a recorded statement from Henry Blackwood, former shareholder and whistleblower. In it, he details threats made by Robert Sterling Beau's father during the forced transfer of corporate shares. She clicked play on the device. Henry's voice, slow and roughened by age, filled the space. They told me if I didn't sign, they'd bury me and anyone I talked to. So I signed. They didn't know I kept the originals. And I made a copy. You always make a copy. Silence followed the final click. Your Honor, Marla added, I also have a sworn witness, Nadine Rourke. The courtroom door opened just as she said the name. Nadine stepped in head high, coat still dusted with road salt. She approached the bench without flinching and handed the clerk her affidavit. She was presumed dead in a car fire in 1997, Marla said quietly, after she told Tobin she was going to speak to regulators. Beau's lawyer stood again, voice tighter now. Even if these documents were genuine, they don't justify the illegal occupation of property, nor do they retroactively change the child custody decision. Marla turned, meeting the lawyer's gaze. No, she said, calm, threading through her tone, but they proved that decision was never fair to begin with. Kessler didn't respond for several seconds. Then he nodded once to the clerk. Enter all documents into the record. The lawyer muttered something inaudible to Beau, then quietly began gathering her files. She didn't even look up when she said, my client will be seeking alternate representation. Marla caught the flicker in Beau's eyes then. Not fury, uncertainty, the first real crack in the mirror-polished surface he always wore. Judge Kessler leaned forward. This court finds sufficient cause to initiate an internal review of Judge Crowley's conduct, pending further confirmation from the State Judicial Board. The custody case will be reopened. He glanced at Beau. You have 24 hours to respond. Any attempt to interfere with this process will be noted as obstruction. Marla exhaled slowly. The air didn't taste like victory, not yet, but it didn't taste like fear anymore either. Her hands weren't shaking. She didn't feel smaller than the room. When she turned back to Beau, her expression didn't hold rage or desperation, just clarity. His eyes darted to the door. No more leverage, no one to run interference. As she stepped out into the cold sun, her phone vibrated with a new message. Republic interest case, we're running it. Stay safe. She read it twice, thumb hovering over the screen, when another notification pulsed, an invitation, terse and unsigned, pointing her to a downtown office that same afternoon. The blinds were half drawn when she pushed open the office door, the stale air carrying old coffee and printer ink. Beau was already behind the desk, suit jacket folded over the chair, gesturing for her to sit. She didn't. He looked tired, not disheveled, just strained, the corner of his mouth twitching when he finally spoke. This doesn't have to get worse, Marla. She kept her arms crossed, weight shifting subtly to her left side. The bruise on her right shoulder had darkened, turning her dominant arm into a dull ache she couldn't ignore. You're offering that, now I'm offering clarity, he said smoothly, sliding a folder across the desk. $2 million. Clean. No taxes, no ties. You walk away, you keep your son, and we all forget the mess. She didn't touch the folder. You're bribing me with my own child. His fingers drummed the desk. You think Ezra's safe if this circus keeps going? You think dragging this into federal court is going to end with you walking out smiling? Maybe not, she replied, but it won't end with you sitting pretty either. Beau leaned forward, voice low but sharp. You don't know what you're dealing with. This isn't just me. There are names in those files that don't belong on headlines. This is bigger than your little comeback story. Marla slipped her phone from her coat pocket and set it face down on the desk. I'm not putting my name on that. You haven't even looked. I don't need to. Her gaze held steady. You gave me time, and that was your mistake. Bo's jaw tightened. In a sudden burst, he circled the desk, slammed open a drawer, and snatched out a pen. He shoved the folder toward her finger, jabbing the line at the bottom. You're going to scrawl here or you'll lose far more than a custody battle. The page blurred under her eyes. His grip clamped over her wrist, dragging her closer to the paper. Do it, he snapped. Her right arm sagged uselessly, muscles locking from the injury that hadn't healed. I can't, she answered, voice flat. That arm's gone. His brows pulled tight, hesitation flickering. She seized it. Her free hand flipped, the phone tapped twice. A small red light glowed. Bo recoiled as realization dawned. I'm live, she whispered. Say it again. His color drained. You wouldn't, I already have. The broadcast ran just 15 seconds, him snarling, his grip visible on her wrist, the threat clear. Sign it or lose everything. She cut the stream as he lunged across the desk. Within minutes, her notifications exploded. Shares, comments, screenshots. One account with 300,000 followers reposted it with the caption, "This is why we don't stay silent." Bo staggered backward, hands twitching like he wanted to tear the air in front of him. Congratulations, he hissed. You just nuked your own life. You tried to pay me to vanish. The door burst open. A voice called from the hallway. Mr. Sterling, federal agents are here. They're requesting an immediate interview. He stood frozen for a breath. Want me to live stream that too? She asked, her voice almost gentle. Bo tugged at his tie, forcing composure, though his eyes betrayed calculation, stripped of arrogance. He had survived years by tugging the right strings, vanishing when pressure rose. But now the knots refused to loosen. He pushed past her in silence. Through the doorway's gap, two agents waited, and beyond them reporters surged forward, phones lifted, shutters bursting in rapid fire. The glare of bulbs washed over his face as he stepped into view, just as Marla's phone vibrated with the first wave of alerts. She flicked through the screen, then again and again. Headlines multiplied without pause, some screaming, others dryly procedural, yet all orbiting the same scandal. Names, figures, and fragments of footage scrolled faster than she could absorb. What she had thought a brief stream had erupted into something far larger. By dawn, the Department of Justice had issued a preliminary statement. Sterling Group's accounts were frozen. The SEC launched a probe into suspect grants and nonprofit laundering. The FBI confirmed an open case on intimidation, fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy. Bo Sterling's name surfaced in every column, every ticker. By mid-morning, her inbox chimed again, this time, a message from the Office of Judicial Oversight. The email was brief. Dear Ms. Loring, we acknowledge receipt of your evidence. Effective immediately, the previous custody ruling issued by Judge Harold K. Merton has been nullified. A new hearing will be scheduled in accordance with state-level judicial review. You have been granted temporary full custody of Ezra Loring until further proceedings. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh either. Her breath caught somewhere between relief and disbelief. Then her body sagged into the chair as if the weight of months' years had finally found the right moment to let go. The courthouse hadn't called about Bo's detainment, but the reporters did. A dozen articles ran the same details. He'd been arrested late the previous evening, charged with interfering in an ongoing investigation, threatening a protected witness, and laundering over $40 million through shell grants tied to education and land development. They said he hadn't spoken a word during processing. Marla sat quietly, her phone face down on the kitchen table. She didn't reach for it again. She and Ezra returned to the house in Asheville that afternoon. The gravel crackled under the tires like it had weeks earlier, but the silence now felt softer, less accusatory. When they stepped out, Marla noticed something near the front gate. A handful of neighbors had left small bouquets, some in jars, some bundled in paper. Daisies, wildflowers, even one cluster of sunflowers tucked in an old boot. No one rang the bell, no one knocked, but eyes met hers from across the road. They nodded. She nodded back. Ezra rushed ahead and kicked off his shoes by the porch, mumbling something about finishing his picture. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon and wood glue. A fresh breeze drifted through the open windows, stirring the edge of a curtain like a whisper. She wandered into the kitchen and stood motionless at the threshold. The sun had shifted across the ceiling beams, casting a lattice of warm gold over the wooden table. Ezra sat hunched over his drawing, his head tilted in that focused way he always had when trying to stay inside the lines. She watched his small hand trace another figure into the lawn on his page. "Is that me?" she asked quietly. He nodded without looking up. "You and me, and Mr. Tobin. That's his toolbox." A pause. "Is he coming back?" Her voice faltered. "I hope so." He added a bird to the sky, an awkward little triangle with wings stretched far too wide, but it made her chest swell. Behind her, the living room remained unchanged, Henry's books stacked in uneven towers, the old phonograph still veiled in dust. Yet the house no longer resembled a relic. It carried the hush of a place waiting to be claimed. Marla collected the bouquets from the gate one at a time, settling them into mismatched jars along the windowsill. When she stepped back into the kitchen, Ezra had already filled a second sheet of paper. This drawing was simpler, the house alone. No shadows, no shattered panes. Smoke spiraled from the chimney like a ribbon unfurling. He looked up. "I think it's ours now," she answered with a quiet nod. "I think so too." The basement door gave a low groan as she removed it from its hinges, but the sound carried no fear anymore, only wood resisting after years of use. The lock that had once barred her from the unknown now lay buried in the junk drawer beside worn batteries and a bulbless flashlight. Downstairs, the scent of timber lingered, but the air felt lighter. Over the past days, she had recycled what could be salvaged, boxed the rest, and swept until no dust clung to her skin. Now daylight spilled through the narrow window she had scrubbed clean, spreading across the concrete floor in a pale band. A small table stood in the corner, with a second-hand chair. Nearby, a shelf held a neat row of books, some Ezra's, some hers a few, from Henry's collection. Above the switch, a scrap of cardboard bore the title Ezra's Reading Den, scrawled in black marker. Ezra had helped design it, suggesting a pillow fort or lava lamp. They compromised on a beanbag and a glowing globe. But what defined the room wasn't furniture, it was intent. In one corner beside a thrifted filing cabinet rested a stack of folders and scanned records. Marla called it the Blackwood Archive, a project meant to trace cases where women had lost homes rights or children through loopholes crafted in silence. She wasn't a lawyer, not even close, but she had lived inside those gaps, knew how phrases dressed as procedure disguised power. It wasn't revenge that drove her. It was resolve that others would not lose years as she had. That morning, she reopened her blog, just her name, no branding. The first post had no sensational title, just a simple one. "This is what it looked like when they tried to erase me." In it, she laid out the bare bones of her story, not the tabloid-ready drama, but the quiet details that often got missed. The warnings ignored. The rooms she wasn't allowed into. The way even her voice had started to sound small to herself. It wasn't polished, but it was honest. The post ended with a line she hadn't planned. It simply came out. "If you're still here, it means you haven't been broken." That counts for something. That afternoon, Ezra came to her with something wrapped in an old bandana. He held it out without a word. Inside was a small piece of wood, smooth sanded a corner from one of Henry's old cabinets. Etched into its surface, likely with one of Tobin's old tools, was a sentence: "Truth doesn't disappear, it just waits for someone to listen." She ran her fingers across the grain, speechless for a beat. "Did you carve this?" Ezra shook his head. "It was in one of the boxes we missed. I just cleaned it up." Her hand trembled slightly as she set it on the reading table beside a lamp that hummed quietly. That night, just before the rain began, Marla stepped out onto the porch. The sky was a soft blur of steel and indigo. Raindrops fell without urgency, tapping gently on the wooden railing. She held a mug of chamomile tea in both hands, its warmth grounding her. She glanced down at the flagstone in the yard, the one she had once pried loose in desperation. Now it sat firmly in place again, pressed flush with the others. But something had changed. Beneath her fingertips, newly carved into the stone, were two words, plain, small, but carved deep. "Still here." She didn't smile exactly. It was quieter than that, like something inside her had finally taken a deep breath after being underwater far too long. Behind her through the rain-slicked window, she could see Ezra asleep on the couch, curled under the blanket with the blue fringe. The glow from the reading lamp pooled around him soft and gold. And somewhere within the quiet hum of the night, the truth sat with her, not erased, not buried, just waiting as it always had been to be seen. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a woman can do is stay. Not run, not beg, but stay long enough to speak, to fight, and to leave the door open for others behind her. Marla didn't win because she was fearless. She won because she refused to be silent. If you're still listening, maybe there's something in your story waiting to be told too. Like what you heard, make sure to follow the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. We've got more stories that hit deep, heal slow, and never let go.